Yeah, my name is Christine. I'm from Case Western Reserve University. And today I'll be presenting on identifying and addressing bias in administrative data system analytics. Administrative data systems are data that is collected by social service agencies for purposes such as program administration and service delivery. So even though this data is not collected for research purposes, it is often used for research, and it's often used to look at things like community assets or unmet needs in the community, gaps in care, anything like that. So when we are using data systems to look at the community in this way, it's important to look at who's accurately represented in these data systems and who may not be accurately represented in these systems. So what we did to kind of further investigate this a little bit was we chose to focus on demographic data because as we know, demographic data is social data. You know, it speaks to people's social identities. And so it's kind of ripe for social biases. So we focused on that. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more here. Thank you. Okay, so this schematic looks at how we at the Poverty Center at Case utilize administrative data. And like I said, we focused on demographic data. So you'll see on the far right-hand side, we're looking at race, ethnicity, and gender. But starting from the left-hand side, we see populations that we're hoping to represent in our databases and populations that we may want to look at in research. So for this example, we're looking at people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing food insecurity, and we also get school data for our administrative data systems. So we're looking at students in Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And all of these populations, they go through some sort of registration and recording process in order to be put into their respective databases. So that's what we see here is, for example, someone who's experiencing homelessness, if they seek homeless services, like if they go to a shelter, then they will, certain information will be collected about them, including their demographic info. And then they'll get put into the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, which is going to be our administrative data system there. So you'll see we have several administrative data systems. And then what we can do is we can link them together to put them in an integrated data system. So what that looks like is, we may see one person in HMIS, and we may see that person also show up in our school data or, in food assistance data, or really in any of these other administrative data systems. And we can say, hey, I think this is the same person. We link them together, and then they get put into our integrated data system. So how we do that is we link on what we feel like are the most objective variables. So that's going to be name and date of birth. And we'll see later that even though we think those are objective variables, they may be a little bit more subjective than we realize. But that is the typical practice, is linking on those. And then after they are put into our integrated data system, we do various cleaning, coding, analyzing, and then we get to our output variables of race, ethnicity, and gender. So what we see is that even after we do all of that and, do our best to standardize the different categories for race, ethnicity, and gender, we do see people who have multiple records show up in those different records with categories that don't match each other. So what we see is that with an increasing number of records for a particular person and or an increasing number of different systems that someone is in, we see that there's a greater likelihood that there may be a category mismatch. And on the left-hand side, we're showing that for race, and on the right-hand side, we're showing that for gender. And since these are people's social identities, the question becomes, how do we accurately, ethically, responsibly represent these people in our administrative data system analytics? What we did to try to look into this further is we conducted what we call a data chat, and we used the FAIR2 framework, excuse me, which is a framework for identifying bias in social data science. Um, so what a data chat is it's like a gathering of people from the community who have lived experience with the data. So, they are represented in this data. So for us, we looked at individuals who had lived experience with homelessness, and we also focused on individuals who were of racial, ethnic, or gender minority. And then we showed them some of the data that we just looked at. So like we showed them those bar graphs, and we asked for their experience and their insights on how bias may present itself in this data. So on the left here, you see our flyers that we use to recruit participants. And then we'll jump into some of the findings on the next slide, but I kind of want to preface the findings with this quote from one of our participants that really gets at, I think, the context of these individuals who are, in vulnerable situations and going to these social service agencies to seek help. So one of our data chat participants said, the worst thing is that you share your info with somebody, and instead of them helping, they're judging and categorizing you. And this is the person that's going to help you, so you're really relying on them to be trustworthy. So we did find three main areas of bias. And the first one here really it pops up right on the front end. So when someone is seeking services and going to these different agencies and giving their information, they have certain categories that they can define themselves. So think about, different race categories, different ethnicity categories, and different gender categories. So, the agencies define which categories are available for someone to checkmark. And what we see is these categories change over time. So if you look at the quote on the right there, one of our participants said, until very recently, the option to be gender inclusive was not a thing because our society was not ready for that. So that speaks to those options changing over time and, maybe hopefully becoming more inclusive over time. Then our second source of bias was around the data intake process. So what we found is there's many influencing factors in what data or what information someone provides about themselves during that data intake process. So really the overarching theme was that people are going to navigate these different systems, navigate these different agencies in ways that are hopefully trying to meet their basic needs, but they're also going to do so in a way that feels safest to them and the least stigmatizing to them. So those are going to affect how they interact with these service providers and what information they provide. And then the third source of bias we found was around changes in name. So our data chat participants identified two populations that may fall into this category. The first was children in foster care or those who either age out of foster care or get adopted. And then the second category was trans folks. So a lot of times when trans folks change their documents, they may change their gender marker and then they may change their name as well. And so what that ends up happening is that in our integrated data system, we really have like an undercount of those trans folks because we are unable to link them. So if you remember earlier, I said we linked on name, and what we found was that name is not really as objective as we thought it was. So that is another source of bias. So what we want to do with these findings is we want to create some guidelines. And I know I'm kind of running short on time, so I'll try to breeze through these. But like the slide says, they are a work in progress. The big ones are really to be transparent about the biases. So that administrative data, those different data systems are already subject to social biases. And then when we as researchers and data analysts do more work on them, more standardizing and cleaning, we are subjecting them to further biases. And then this just highlights those two areas. So again, those databases are the first area of bias, and then the cleaning and coding is the second area of bias. And then finally, if you do have influence over, the front end of data collection, you obviously want to advocate for inclusive options from the beginning. But if not, you always want to seek to understand the data generating process from those people who are represented in the data. And I know I'm just about out of time, so I think I think that is about it.